New Orleans is loud, but the real hell was the noise in my head. Coming back from Afghanistan was the second war. The first was against PTSD. I, Ralph, an ex-Marine, lived isolated, trapped by nightmares. Every therapist failed. Then came Jax, a German shepherd with a past of abandonment. Together, in the silence of the bayou, we fought my last battle. The loyal dog didn't just heal the invisible, he rewrote the ending of my war. He proved that salvation would come on 4 paws. In the Bayou St. John neighborhood in New Orleans, the shotgun houses created an atmosphere of sad beauty that I couldn't feel. I'd returned from Afghanistan with a Medal of Honor, but also with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. I lived in seclusion, in the dark, avoiding the city noise and people. My only contact was my sister, Susan, who lived in Baton Rouge and visited once a month, driven by desperate and growing concern. Things got worse after a fireworks show at City Park, which triggered a terrible crisis, mimicking the sound of mortars. I couldn't sleep anymore, and the isolation became total. The problem wasn't just PTSD, but my refusal to accept help, convinced I was broken and beyond recovery. Susan, on our last visit, begged me to try something, mentioning service dog programs for veterans. I ignored her, but the seed of the idea was planted in her desperation. My response was hardened denial. I saw service dogs as another form of charity that would only strengthen my status as a poor thing. I felt guilty for having survived, an obstacle that prevented any healing. However, in a rare moment of insomnia, I was surfing the internet and saw a pop-up ad from a NOLA dog shelter. The photo was of a German shepherd, strong but with scared eyes. The contrast between the breed's heritage, service, protection, and that dog's vulnerability touched a chord in my own trauma. Driven by a compulsion I didn't understand, I drove to the shelter in the lower Ninth Ward. I wasn't looking for a service dog, just a distraction. There, I found Jax, the German shepherd, abandoned for being too scared for protection. Unlike other dogs, Jax didn't bark. He just shrank back. I crouched down, and the dog, with his noble posture and dark coat, crawled over and put his snout in my hand. The action was quick. I signed the papers, feeling I was rescuing something that was somehow a broken part of myself. I took Jax home, to the silence and mold of my residence in Bayou St. John. The immediate result was a strange tension. I wasn't alone anymore, but I still felt isolated. The first night brought the coming crisis. A terrible nightmare woke me in panic, and I, in a flashback episode, reached for my gun. Jax, who was sleeping nearby, got up and let out a low whimper. The crisis had been interrupted, but the night was just beginning, and I had a gun in my hand. If you have a pet, leave their name in the comments and tell us how they came into your life. And please like the video, it helps us a lot. Now let's see how this story continues. The shotgun house in Bayou St. John, New Orleans now had a guard. I, exhausted, had calmed down, but was still on edge. Jax was lying at my feet, motionless, a counterpoint of calm to my gasping breath. The shepherd, even though scared, had become a thermometer. His quietness was the only thing convincing me I was safe and at home, not on the battlefield. The real problem wasn't external noise anymore, but my vigilance ritual. I refused to sleep deeply and spent the night on alert. Near dawn, PTSD showed up again. I, still dazed, started getting up, walking toward the door, as if I were on patrol. The obstacle was my own mind, which insisted on reliving the war. When I tried to pass through the bedroom door, Jax didn't bark or growl. Instead, he sensed the change in my muscle tension. His unexpected action was to move quickly and curl up against my legs, trying to hide from my movement. At the height of my confusion, I felt frustration and anger rising. I felt like pushing the dog away. But Jax's expression, which was one of loyalty and a plea for comfort, made me stop. Jax, sensing my hesitation, moved out of the way and sat down. Then he turned his head and, with his front paw, touched my knee. It was a light touch, but a call to reality. The weak morning light started coming through the window, breaking through the darkness of trauma. The shepherd was pulling me back to the present, to the safety of my home in Louisiana. I collapsed on the floor, and for the first time since I came back from Afghanistan, I hugged someone, the dog I barely knew. The result of that morning was my first real peace. I didn't sleep, but I didn't have another crisis. The silence of the house was now a shared silence. Jax wasn't a trained service dog, but he was doing the job. Susan, my sister, called later, and I, for the first time, didn't reject her, but just said, "I think he saved me." The hook came at the end of the day, when I realized Jax was shaken with fear from a street noise. The Marine who couldn't save himself now had the responsibility of being the protector of the scared dog. My relationship with Jax solidified into a strange and tender status quo of mutual dependence. Jax was still scared, frightened by distant sirens. I, now less absorbed in my own trauma, had taken on the role of the dog's protector. I cleaned Jax's dark coat and made sure the dog felt safe in the yard. The inverted logic of the situation was that by focusing on Jax's fragility, I had less time to focus on mine. The central problem of the week came from Jax's need for constant exercise. The shepherd needed to move, but I rarely left the house. Jax, in turn, showed his anxiety by chewing furniture. The obstacle was my own seclusion, which now harmed my protector's well-being. The destruction of an old stool from my grandmother, one of the few objects of sentimental value, triggered my emotional response. Not anger, but guilt. I felt I was failing Jax, just as I felt I had failed my companions in service. That guilt motivated me. For the first time in months, I took an unexpected action. I put on a cap and a jacket and prepared to go out. I wasn't going out for myself, but to save Jax from anxiety. I put the strong leash on Jax, and instead of going to the busy street, I took Jax to an isolated and shaded dirt path near the canal. Jax, initially hesitant and with his tail low, started running timidly. Whenever a distant noise scared him, he ran behind me, and I would crouch down and offer him safety. The Marine, used to leading men, was now leading a scared dog, and this gave me a hidden sense of worth. The walk was a success. I came home physically exhausted, but with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. Jax lay down exhausted, but at peace. The result was a small victory over PTSD. I had returned to life, driven by the need of another living being. The hook came when Susan called, saying she'd be in New Orleans on the weekend and wanted to take me and Jax to the busy French Quarter, a place I swore I'd never step foot in again. Saturday in New Orleans dawned busy. I was in my house, terrified of the idea of going to the French Quarter. Jax's presence was my only anchor. My sister, Susan, arrived from Baton Rouge, and her enthusiasm was a striking contrast to my attention. The status quo was the test, leaving seclusion and facing the sensory chaos of the city, an obstacle that seemed impossible to overcome. The walk down Rue Bourbon was the trigger. The problem was sensory overload. The loud jazz, the smell of food, the drunk crowds, and the shrill sound of a float passing by. My heart started racing. The sounds merged into echoes of explosions in Afghanistan. I started hyperventilating, reliving the trauma in broad daylight. My ability to have a functional life was at stake. My body went into combat mode, ready to fight or flee. I clenched my fists and started shrinking into the corner of a brick wall. Susan tried to speak, but I couldn't hear her. Jax acted first. He positioned himself in front of me, with his back to me, facing the crowd, like a true guard dog. Jax, sensing the pressure from the crowd, panicked, curling up violently against my legs, trying to hide from the chaos. The pressure of his body created a physical boundary for me. In a crucial moment, when a drunk man tried to approach, Jax let out a low, sharp growl, an instinctive fear reaction, surprising me. The hidden meaning was clear. The dog was as broken as I was, and the pressure of Jax's body forced me out of the combat spiral. Jax's action broke the flashback. I let myself be guided by the dog. In the alley, I leaned on Jax, breathing deeply until the chaos of the present overcame the echoes of the past. The result was a victory. I didn't run home and didn't collapse. Susan and my brother-in-law Brad looked at me with silent relief. The shepherd, the scared one, had become the hero in the loudest place in New Orleans. Accepting that my dog, the only one who had healed me, was aging fast wasn't easy, and the final war would be saying goodbye.
2 years had passed since the victory on Rue Bourbon. I had found my new purpose. I used my military knowledge and my experience with Jax to train other service and emotional support dogs for veterans at a NOLA center. Jax, the shepherd, was visibly aged, with his snout completely white and his movements slow, but he was the master dog of the center, a living symbol of healing. Jax's health declined on a foggy Louisiana morning. He couldn't get up, and the vet confirmed his kidneys were failing. The problem wasn't just the loss of the dog, but the possibility of a return to isolation, as I feared my PTSD might come back without my pillar of support. The race against time was to make sure my healing was lasting. My response was one of silent but mature pain. I didn't despair or isolate myself. Instead, I spent Jax's last week with me, lying on the living room rug, telling stories of my military service, as if I were doing a debriefing with an old comrade. The unexpected action was that I refused to focus on the pain of loss, but rather on gratitude. The decision for euthanasia was made at the end of a rainy day. The family gathered in the living room. While the vet prepared, Jax, already weak, struggled to lift his head. He didn't whimper, but with his tongue reached my hand for a final lick. In that moment, I felt a wave of calm. I finally let myself cry, but they were tears of grief, not despair. Jax passed away peacefully. I took the leash of a new shepherd, younger, who would be trained for a veteran in crisis. I smiled. The result was the understanding that Rax's mission continued through me. The shepherd who healed the invisible left a legacy of purpose. The final war had been won, and I, the veteran, had become the hero, ensuring Jax's service lived forever in the New Orleans community. The return of silence to my Bayou St. John house was different this time. It wasn't an oppressive silence, but a respectful echo of the peace Jax had conquered. I felt the pain of loss, but it didn't paralyze me. It motivated me. The shepherd didn't heal me in isolation, but forced me to re-engage with life, to feel the humid sun of New Orleans, and to embrace responsibility for another being. Jax, the scared dog, taught me that strength isn't in the absence of fear, but in action despite it. I had convinced myself I was permanently broken, but the unconditional love and silent alarm of the German Shepherd rebuilt me. I transformed traumatic vigilance into a purpose, helping other veterans find their own Jacks. The legacy of the New Orleans Shepherd wasn't the absence of PTSD, but my ability to manage it, to live with the invisible scars, but not be defined by them. The war had ended, not in Afghanistan, but in the quiet living room in Louisiana, where a loyal dog offered his body as a shield and his love as the only therapy I needed.